The hum of the spaceship's engines was the only sound that filled the room as Captain Adam Hayes sat in his seat, staring out at the dark expanse of space. It had been a long journey, and Earth had just entered into an uneasy peace with the Vexari, a powerful alien race whose history was written in the stars. Humanity had barely survived the first wave of encounters with these strange and formidable beings. It was a moment of caution, a fragile truce between two vastly different species. But no one had expected what was about to happen. The Vexari ship, a massive floating fortress of metal and light, hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere. It was beautiful in an alien, almost unsettling way. Massive engines glowed with an unnatural energy, and strange symbols covered the ship's hull. It was as if the vessel itself was a living entity, a symbol of the power and mystery of the race that controlled it. Inside the command center, Captain Hayes and his team were anxiously awaiting any signs of communication from the Vexari. The world was watching. News stations were broadcasting live, and the military was on high alert. Everyone knew this moment could change the course of human history forever. Would this encounter bring peace, or would it lead to another conflict that could wipe humanity from the galaxy? Then, the silence was broken. A deep, almost melodic voice echoed through the room, causing Captain Hayes to jump. It was a voice like no other, powerful and graceful, yet holding a weight of ancient authority. The voice came from a screen that flickered to life before them, revealing the face of Queen Farika, the leader of the Vexari. Her presence on the screen was overwhelming. She was both beautiful and terrifying, her alien features framed by a crown of radiant energy. Her eyes, a deep shade of purple, gleamed with an intelligence that seemed to reach beyond the confines of the universe. She spoke with calm authority, but there was something about her expression, something unreadable, that made Captain Hayes feel both honored and uneasy at the same time. "I am Queen Farika of the Vexari," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, "and I have come to ask you a question, Earthling." The room fell silent. Every person in the command center held their breath, unsure of what was coming next. The question could mean anything, but no one had expected what happened next. The Queen's gaze shifted slightly, her eyes locking onto Captain Hayes through the screen. For a brief moment, he felt as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. "Tell me," she continued, her tone softening just a little, "what is it like to mate with a human?" Captain Hayes froze. The words hung in the air, thick with disbelief. It wasn't a request for information about Earth's politics or technology. It wasn't even a question about the state of the world. No, it was a deeply personal, incredibly intimate question. The entire room went dead silent. Every single person in the command center was too stunned to speak. "Do you what?" Captain Hayes stammered, unsure if he had heard correctly. Queen Farika's expression remained impassive, though there was a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "I ask because I have seen the strength of your species, the bond you form with one another, your emotional depth. It is something the Vexari have lost over countless generations. We no longer understand what it is like to feel such a bond. What is it like to mate with a human?" The captain was still in shock. The entire room waited for his response, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. What could he say? What could anyone say to a question like that? He had faced enemy fleets, endured deadly encounters with alien species, but never in his career had he been confronted with something so personal, so strange. As he struggled to find words, his mind raced. Why would the Queen ask this? What could she possibly want to know about humanity's most intimate relationships? Was it a test, a challenge, or something else entirely? We form deep emotional connections," Captain Hayes finally managed to say, his voice steady but cautious. "Humans bond in ways that go beyond physical attraction. Our connections are built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. Mating is a part of that, but it's more than just physical. It's about emotions, about building something together." The Queen's gaze remained locked on him, her expression still unreadable. "That is intriguing." The Vexeri have long lost the ability to form such bonds. We reproduce only through a genetic exchange, a cold and detached process. We have never understood the meaning of love, or what it feels like to bond with another being beyond the necessity of reproduction. You say that your species can form a connection so powerful that it can change your very lives. I find that fascinating. The room was eerily quiet. Captain Hayes was still processing what he had just heard. The Vexeri, a race that had dominated the galaxy, had lost the very thing that made them human: emotion. They had become creatures of logic and necessity, devoid of the passions that drove humanity to connect with each other. But why was the Queen asking him? Why had she chosen Earth, of all places, to seek this knowledge? "Are you asking me to explain it to you?" Hayes asked, his voice low. "To teach you what it feels like?" Queen Farrakha nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "Not just to explain. I seek to understand. I wish to experience it. To know what it feels like to bond with a human, to feel the emotions that drive your species." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating them all. The captain was no longer just speaking to an alien queen. He was faced with a request that defied all logic and reason. As the reality of the situation sank in, Captain Hayes realized that he had two choices: refuse and risk entering the most powerful race in the galaxy, or agree and face the unknown consequences of this alien queen's strange, impossible request. And in that moment, the future of Earth seemed uncertain, hanging on the delicate balance of a question that no one, not even Captain Hayes, could have prepared for. The clock was ticking, and Earth's fate hung in the balance. Would they dare to answer the Queen's impossible request? Or would humanity face something far worse than they could have ever imagined? The decision was about to change everything. The days that followed the Queen's unexpected request were filled with confusion and uncertainty. Captain Hayes spent hours in closed-door meetings with the highest-ranking officials on Earth. The entire planet was watching, waiting for any kind of answer. The world's leaders, military commanders, and even scientists couldn't fathom what had just transpired. They were all in shock, struggling to understand why the Vexeri Queen would ask such an intimate question of a human. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed that the Queen's request was a test, a challenge to humanity's strength and worth. Others thought it was a manipulation, an attempt to weaken Earth's resolve by playing on its most private and vulnerable emotions. Yet there was no clear answer. No one had ever encountered a situation like this before, and the risks were enormous. The fate of humanity could very well hang in the balance. One wrong move could lead to destruction, while a carefully calculated response might lead to something humanity had never even dared to dream about: a chance to gain the Vexeri's knowledge, their technology, and perhaps even their alliance. Captain Hayes found himself wrestling with his thoughts, feeling more like a pawn than a hero. He had been trained for combat, for leadership, for crisis situations, but never for something like this. He had faced alien forces, fought in battles that had determined the future of Earth, but now he was being asked to confront something far more personal, something far more dangerous. The question was simple: what is it like to mate with a human? But the weight of the implications was immeasurable. He had spent hours poring over the ancient texts on alien species, studying what he could about the Vexeri, but none of it had prepared him for what was to come. Earth had been preparing for this moment for years, but no one had predicted the Vexeri would reach out in such an intimate way. What did she mean by her request? What did it signify for the future of Earth? The captain knew that whatever decision he made would not be his alone. The eyes of the world were upon him. Every action, every word he spoke would be scrutinized and dissected. Even as he sat alone in his quarters, the weight of the world seemed to press down on him, each breath heavier than the last. He couldn't help but think about the Queen's words, about her curiosity regarding the emotional bonds that humans shared. Was this a genuine desire to understand, or was it something more dangerous? Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Finally, in a closed briefing with his team, Captain Hayes stood before the leaders of Earth's military and government. They were all waiting for him to make a decision, to give them direction. They wanted an answer. Should they comply with the Queen's request, or refuse and risk the consequences? "Captain, you're the only one who has spoken to her," General Davidson said, his voice grave. "What do you think? Is this a test, or is it something deeper?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he thought back to the Queen's face on the screen, her gaze piercing through him, as if she could see every thought and fear in his mind. She had seemed so detached, yet also vulnerable in a way that made him question everything. The Vexari were a powerful race, one that had crushed entire civilizations in their wake, but they were also a race that had lost something vital over centuries. "Maybe it's not just about us," Hayes finally said, his voice steady but unsure. "Maybe it's about them. The Vexari have lost something we have in abundance, our ability to connect." The Queen seemed desperate. She wants to know what it feels like to truly bond, to feel emotion. And maybe, just maybe, it's more than just curiosity. Maybe she's asking because she has no other choice. General Davidson looked at him, clearly troubled. "You're suggesting that the Queen of the Vexari is seeking something as personal as emotional connection?" Captain Hayes nodded. "Yes, I think that's exactly what she's asking for. But what happens if we refuse her? What happens to Earth if we don't take this seriously?" The room fell silent. The implications of what Captain Hayes was suggesting were immense. If the Vexari felt rejected, they might retaliate. They might see humanity's refusal as a sign of weakness, and if they decided to act, the consequences could be catastrophic. On the other hand, if Captain Hayes agreed to the Queen's request, he would be stepping into an unknown territory, one that could change not just his life, but the entire course of human history. The pressure was mounting with every passing second, and with every new thought, a new question arose. Was this a chance to prove humanity's worth to the galaxy, or was it a dangerous game that could lead to their downfall? Could Captain Hayes trust that the Queen's interest in humanity was genuine, or was this all part of a larger, more complex plan? The hours felt like days, and finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Captain Hayes made up his mind. He stood tall, facing the leaders of Earth, knowing full well that his decision would echo through the future of humanity. "I'll go to her," he said quietly, his voice heavy with resolve. "I'll meet the Queen face to face. I'll learn why she wants to know about human connection. And I'll find out if we can offer her what she seeks without putting Earth in danger." The room was filled with silence, and for a moment, Captain Hayes wondered if he had made the right choice. But there was no going back now. His destiny, and perhaps the destiny of humanity, was now in the hands of a being far more powerful and ancient than he could have ever imagined. And with that, he prepared himself for the next chapter in this extraordinary, unexpected encounter. The day of Captain Hayes' departure to meet Queen Verica arrived quickly, and with it an air of unease that hung over him like a dark cloud. The ship that would carry him to the heart of the Vexari Empire was already prepped and waiting, sleek and silent as it rested on the launch pad. The massive spacecraft seemed like a quiet giant, full of unknown technology and alien systems, each one a testament to the power of the Vexari. Earth's finest military engineers had made sure everything was ready for the journey, but nothing could prepare Captain Hayes for what he was about to face. As he boarded the vessel, he took one last look at Earth through the viewports, his home planet. Beautiful, fragile, and so full of life, seemed so far away already, as if it was a distant memory. The weight of his mission pressed heavily on his chest. The ship's hum was calming, but it did nothing to ease the tension in his heart. What was he stepping into? What kind of encounter awaited him on the Vexari flagship? He had never been one to fear the unknown, but this felt different. There was too much at stake, too much that could go wrong. Inside the ship, the artificial intelligence that guided the vessel spoke in a soft, steady voice, giving him updates on the trajectory and the status of the systems. But none of it mattered. His mind kept drifting back to the moment of the Queen's request. Why had she asked him? A simple human, such an intimate question. Could it be part of some grander scheme, a vexillary trap to manipulate humanity into submission? Or could it be something entirely different, an alien queen's quest to understand something she had lost long ago? The Vexari had conquered countless worlds, their empire stretching across the stars. Their technology was beyond anything humans had ever dreamed of. Yet despite all their power, they were a race that had forsaken emotional bonds and connections. Their civilization, built on logic and cold efficiency, had lost something vital, something that humans still had in abundance. It was this emotional connection that made humans different, and perhaps it was this very difference that intrigued Queen Farika. As the ship traveled deeper into space, Captain Hayes pondered the possibility that the Queen wasn't looking to manipulate humanity, but rather seeking something that had eluded her for centuries. She had said it herself. The Vexari had lost the ability to form emotional connections. They were creatures of efficiency and survival, cold in their desires and motivations. Perhaps in her own way, Queen Farika was trying to reclaim something that was once fundamental to her species, a desire for love, for companionship, for something beyond mere survival. The ship cut through the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before him. He couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the endless expanse. And yet, it was accompanied by a feeling of isolation. Earth seemed so small now, like a speck in the great darkness. Even if humanity survived this encounter, would they ever truly understand the vastness of the universe and the beings that inhabited it? After what seemed like an eternity, the Vexari flagship came into view. It was unlike anything Captain Hayes had ever seen. The ship was a marvel of design, its surfaces shimmering with an unnatural energy that made it seem almost alive. Massive, spiraling structures stretched out from the central core of the ship, like tendrils reaching into the void. The sheer size of it was incomprehensible. A ship that could carry an entire fleet, yet here it was, waiting in the dark, a symbol of a species far beyond humanity's current understanding. The ship docked silently with the Vexari flagship, and Captain Hayes felt the weight of his mission settle in. As he stepped onto the alien vessel, he was greeted by a group of Vexari attendants, their eyes glowing faintly with the same purple hue as their queen's. They moved silently, their presence almost ghostly as they led him down long, dark corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. The architecture of the ship was unlike anything human design could replicate. Smooth, angular surfaces that twisted and turned in ways that defied the laws of gravity. It felt as though the ship itself was alive, its walls pulsating with energy. Finally, they reached a vast chamber at the heart of the ship. The space was enormous, its ceiling stretching high above, where soft lights flickered like distant stars. And there, seated at the center of the room, was Queen Farika. Her presence was commanding, her regal form draped in flowing garments that shimmered with an iridescent glow. Her purple eyes, which had haunted his thoughts since their first meeting, were now fixed on him. She looked both serene and powerful, the embodiment of an ancient race that had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Captain Hayes, she spoke, her voice as melodic as it had been before, though there was a new warmth in it now, as if her curiosity had softened into something deeper. I welcome you to my ship. You have come to answer my question, and I believe it is time for you to see what we, the Vexari, have lost. Captain Hayes felt a shiver run down his spine. He could not escape the feeling that he was stepping into something far beyond his understanding, something that might change humanity's future forever. He stood tall, trying to shake off the anxiety creeping up his spine. I have come as requested, Your Majesty, he replied. But I must ask, what do you truly hope to find here? What is it that you seek from us, from humans? Queen Farika's gaze softened for a moment, a hint of vulnerability flickering in her expression. I seek to understand, Captain. I seek to feel what it is to bond with another, to love, to care. My people have forgotten such things. I have seen the depth of connection that humans share with each other, and I wish to know if such feelings are as powerful as they seem. Can a human teach me what it is like to truly bond? The question hung in the air, and Captain Hayes could feel the weight of it. The room seemed to shrink around him, as if the very walls were listening. This was not just an alien's curiosity, it was a plea, a request for something that had been lost to a race that had known power but not love. And now, Captain Hayes had a decision to make. Would he be the one to answer this impossible request? Would he risk everything, humanity, his own life, for a chance to connect with a being from another world? Captain Hayes stood there, facing the Queen, his mind racing with the weight of the moment. The air in the room seemed to thicken, as if the very stars outside the ship were holding their breath. Queen Farika's violet eyes, so ancient and filled with mystery, studied him intently, as though waiting for his answer to shape the course of history. The stillness in the chamber was profound, making his heartbeat feel louder than it should. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission, nor a military operation. This was something far more personal, something that transcended anything Captain Hayes had ever trained for. He had come here with the resolve of a soldier, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. But now, faced with this strange and intimate request, he was questioning everything he knew. The Vexari were an advanced, formidable race. Could they truly have lost the ability to bond emotionally? Was this request a genuine one, or a ploy to manipulate him, to manipulate humanity? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that there was something deeply vulnerable in Queen Farika's words. She wasn't just asking about human emotions. She was asking about a part of life that had been stripped from her people, something that could never be regained through conquest, technology, or power. Queen Farika broke the silence, her voice soft yet filled with a force that made every word resonate. Do you understand, Captain Hayes? My people are warriors, conquerors of countless worlds, but we have no understanding of what it means to love, to connect on the deepest level. The Vexari Empire has no place for such emotions. Our strength lies in our ability to survive, to conquer. But what good is that strength when we no longer know how to live? My curiosity about humans comes from seeing how you form bonds, how you care for one another, despite your wars and your flaws. How do you do it? The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Captain Hayes was speechless. He had heard tales of the Vexari Empire's military might, their relentless drive to conquer and control. But now, standing before their queen, he realized that there was something more to them than just a cold, calculating species. They were not invincible after all. Beneath their strength and fearsome reputation, they had lost something essential. Captain Hayes thought of his own life, of the family, friends, and comrades he had fought alongside. He thought of the love that had sustained him, the bonds that had given him strength in the darkest of times. Despite all the hardships humanity had faced, it was these connections that had allowed them to endure, to thrive. He had never really thought about it before, but now he realized that these bonds were what made humans truly powerful. Not their technology, not their military might, but their ability to care, to love, to fight for one another. He looked at the Queen, trying to measure her sincerity. She had the air of a ruler, a conqueror who had seen the universe in all its violence and despair. Yet here she was, seeking something that was foreign to her, something that could very well change the course of her life, and the life of her entire empire. I understand, Captain Hayes said slowly, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. I understand more than you might think. Humans aren't perfect, Your Majesty. We've fought wars, destroyed worlds, and torn each other apart. But in the end, it's the connections we have with each other that make us who we are. We fight for our families, our friends, and our people. We love despite everything, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible. Queen Farika leaned forward slightly, her eyes widening, as if she were hanging on every word. Then tell me, Captain, what is it like? What does it feel like to bond with another human? What does it mean to love? For a moment, Captain Hayes wasn't sure how to respond. How could he explain something so deeply ingrained in human nature to someone who had never felt it? How could he put into words something that was so integral to his very existence, yet so difficult to define? But in the end, he realized that the Queen was not asking for an explanation. She was asking for an experience. She wanted to understand, to feel, to know what it was like to truly connect. It's, Captain Hayes began, searching for the right words, it's everything. It's not just about physical connection or about survival. It's about trust, loyalty, and the strength to be vulnerable with someone. It's about sharing a piece of yourself with another person and knowing that they'll protect it. And when it's real, when it's true, it can move mountains. It makes you stronger than you could ever be alone. That's why we fight. For each other. The Queen listened intently, her expression unreadable. For a long time, she didn't speak, and Captain Hayes wasn't sure what she was thinking. Was she absorbing his words, or was she judging them, analyzing the humanity that he spoke of? Finally, she stood, her regal presence more intimidating than ever, but now there was something different in her eyes. An emotion, something that resembled hope, maybe even longing. You speak of strength, Captain. I see now that it is not the strength of weapons or armies that defines a species. It is the strength of their bonds, their hearts, their willingness to fight for each other. I have watched your species from afar, and I have seen the power of your unity. It is not something we have, but perhaps it is something we can learn. Captain Hayes felt a pang of sympathy for the alien Queen, an emotion he hadn't expected to feel. In her pursuit of power, she had discovered something she lacked, something that he, as a human, had taken for granted. She was not just a ruler of an empire. She was a creature seeking redemption, trying to find a way to reclaim something that had been lost to her people. The room fell silent once more, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with tension. Instead, it felt like the calm before something profound, a moment where two beings from entirely different worlds had begun to understand each other. The Queen stepped closer to Captain Hayes, her gaze unwavering. I want to see it for myself. I want to understand what it means to truly bond with another. Captain Hayes swallowed hard. He knew that this was no longer just a diplomatic mission. This was something far more personal, something that could change not just the course of his life, but the future of both humanity and the Vexari Empire. What would happen next was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This encounter had set into motion a chain of events that no one could predict. And as Captain Hayes prepared himself for the next step, he couldn't shake the feeling that the future was no longer in his hands alone. It was in the hands of an alien queen whose world was about to change forever. Captain Hayes stood in front of Queen Verica, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. Her words had hung in the air like a challenge, a plea, and now the world felt different. His mind raced, filled with the enormity of what he was about to do. Could a single human, a single act, truly change the course of an entire empire? Could the very thing that made humanity unique, their capacity to love and bond, be the key to transforming an entire species that had long forgotten such things? He felt her eyes on him, intense and searching. There was no mistaking the sincerity in her gaze. This was not an order, nor was it manipulation. It was a request, one born out of desperation, perhaps, but also hope. Hope that humanity's strength lay not in their weapons or technology, but in something far simpler, far more fragile, their connections to each other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The chamber remained still, the faint hum of the ship's energy systems, the only sound breaking the silence. Hayes felt like he was standing on the edge of something monumental, a precipice with no clear way down. His mind kept flashing back to Earth, his home, his people. What was the cost of fulfilling this request? What would it mean for humanity, for the Vexari, for the galaxy itself? Finally, he broke the silence. I don't know if I'm the one to show you, Your Majesty, he said, his voice softer than he intended. I'm just a soldier. I've fought battles, led men and women in combat, But this, he paused, struggling to put the words together. This is something beyond my experience. It's not something I can just explain to you. It's something you have to feel, to experience for yourself. Queen Farika didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on him, unwavering. The queen's expression remained serene, but there was an unmistakable hunger behind her eyes, a hunger for understanding, for something her empire had lost long ago. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that left no room for hesitation. "Then show me," she said. "If you cannot explain it, then show me, Captain Hayes. Show me what it means to bond, to love, to connect in ways that are beyond the cold logic of my people." There was no turning back now. Hayes felt his pulse quicken. This was no longer just a mission. It was a crossroads, a test of everything that made humanity who they were. If he failed, the consequences could be catastrophic, perhaps not just for humanity, but for the galaxy at large. The Vexari were powerful, and if they learned the strength that came from emotional bonds, they would become an even greater threat. But if he succeeded, if he could somehow reach through to the Queen, it could change everything. He took a step forward, his gaze meeting hers. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to consider the sheer weight of what he was about to do. But the thoughts faded as quickly as they arrived. There was no time for doubt. If he was to do this, he had to do it with all his heart. "I will try," he said, his voice steady now, though he felt the uncertainty still simmering beneath the surface. He extended his hand toward the Queen, offering her the only thing he had, the simple but profound act of human connection. "Let me show you. I don't know if it will work, but I'll give you the truth of it." Farika seemed to hesitate for only a fraction of a second before stepping forward, her gaze fixed on his hand. Then, with a motion that seemed both tentative and deliberate, she placed her hand in his. The touch was electric, not in the way of technology or power, but in the sheer human warmth that flowed between them. For a moment, the universe seemed to stop. The chaos of war, the vastness of space, the looming questions of diplomacy, they all faded away. It was just the two of them, standing in the heart of a Vexari worship, feeling the connection between their two species. The Queen's hand was cold, but there was something soft in the way she held his, something searching. "I don't understand it," Verika said quietly, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "But I can feel something. There's something here, in this touch, something more than just the physical." Captain Hayes nodded, feeling the connection intensify. "It's not something you can explain with words," he said. "It's trust. It's knowing that someone has your back, no matter what happens. It's a bond that goes deeper than anything you can see or touch." The Queen's eyes, which had always held an air of distant authority, softened just slightly, and for the first time, Hayes saw something in her gaze that reminded him of a human emotion: vulnerability. She was not a queen of a mighty empire anymore. She was a being, alone in her search for meaning, longing for something that had been lost to her kind for centuries. "You are teaching me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You are showing me what it means to be human." The words struck him harder than he anticipated. For the first time, Captain Hayes saw the enormity of what was happening. It wasn't just the Vexari Empire that was in play here. It was something even bigger. This was a moment of transformation, not just for the Queen, but for an entire species that had once ruled the stars with ruthless power, but now found themselves yearning for the very thing that had once made humanity strong. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of the shared experience, the beginning of an understanding that neither of them had expected. And as Captain Hayes stood there, holding the Queen's hand, he realized that the fate of the galaxy no longer rested solely on the outcome of battles or the might of weaponry. It rested on something far more fragile, far more powerful, the connection between two beings, a connection that could unite entire civilizations or tear them apart. And for the first time, he wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that humanity's strength, its true strength, had the potential to reshape the very fabric of the universe. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Captain Hayes and Queen Verica stood in a delicate silence, each processing the weight of what had just transpired. Their hands still remained intertwined, and although neither spoke, a new understanding had formed between them. The air seemed to hum with something unseen, something ancient, something powerful. Captain Hayes couldn't help but reflect on how far humanity had come. From the earliest days of warfare and survival on Earth to the advanced technological marvels they now commanded, humans had always relied on something greater than mere weapons and strategy. They had relied on the strength of their bonds, on their ability to stand together even when the odds seemed impossible. And now, standing in the heart of an alien warship, he was beginning to understand just how different the Vexari were, how they had allowed themselves to lose something that humans held sacred. He looked at Queen Verica. Her expression was different now, softer, more reflective. She was no longer the cold, calculating queen of a ruthless empire. She was something more, a being searching for meaning, for connection. For the first time since their encounter began, Hayes saw the vulnerability in her, the realization that perhaps her entire empire had been misguided in its pursuit of power. Perhaps in the end, it was love, not war, that was the true force of the universe. Verica broke the silence, her voice low but filled with a deep intensity. "I feel it," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "The power of it. It's unlike anything we have ever known." Captain Hayes nodded, feeling the deep sense of responsibility settle within him. "That's the essence of humanity, Your Majesty. It's not in our technology, nor in our weapons. It's in our connections, in our love for one another. It's what makes us strong, what gives us hope even in the darkest times." Verica's violet eyes never left him. "I see now that we have been blinded by our power. We believed strength was found in our weapons, in our armies. But you, Captain, you have shown me that true strength lies in something far more elusive, in the connections you make, in the love you share with your people." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was a quiet understanding between them now, an unspoken promise. Queen Verica was not just the leader of the Vexari Empire anymore. She was a student of something deeper, something that had always eluded her people. The emotional power that humanity held within itself was something she had never considered, never understood until now. "Will you teach us, Captain?" Verica asked suddenly, her voice almost pleading. "Will you teach us what it means to love, to truly connect? I cannot undo centuries of cold logic with a single conversation. But perhaps we can start anew. Perhaps we can find the same strength that your people have found." Captain Hayes felt his heart racing again. The weight of her words, of her plea, was almost unbearable. He had come to the Vexari Empire to protect humanity, to secure a future for his people. But now, faced with the alien queen's request, he understood that the stakes had shifted. It was no longer just about survival or conquest. It was about something far more profound, about healing a wounded empire, about reconnecting a species that had lost its way. "I don't know if I can teach you everything, Your Majesty," Hayes said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of awe. "But I can show you the way. It's not about grand gestures or words. It's about actions, about understanding the people you care about listening, and about showing them that you're there for them no matter what." Verica's eyes softened, and for the first time since their meeting began, she allowed herself a smile. It was small, tentative, but it was real. "Then let us begin, Captain. Together, we will find this strength. Together, we will learn." Captain Hayes felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The future was uncertain, filled with possibilities he had never considered. But one thing was clear: humanity had a unique gift, one that could not only protect their own future, but potentially save others as well. If the Vexari could learn this lesson, if they could learn to value the bonds that connected them, perhaps they could stop their endless conquest of the galaxy. Perhaps they could find a new way to exist, a way that valued love, empathy, and connection over war. "I will do my best, Your Majesty," Hayes said, his voice steady. "Together, we'll find a new way. A way of strength through unity, not conquest." Verica stepped back, her expression filled with gratitude. "I hope you are right, Captain. I hope that we can learn from you. I will look to you for guidance." With that, the Queen turned away, her presence still commanding despite the vulnerability she had shown. As she left the room, Captain Hayes was left alone with his thoughts, still holding the weight of what had just transpired. But now, there was hope. Hope that the future of humanity, and even the Vexari Empire, could be different from what it had been. For the first time in a long while, Captain Hayes didn't feel like he was simply fighting for survival. He felt like he was fighting for something greater, something more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any empire. He was fighting for connection. And in that moment, he knew that this was a fight worth winning.